Okay, Muscleheads, welcome to the second episode of the Super Musclecast. Today we're going to be going through Kinnikuman Episode 2, The Target is Nessie and Save Planet Kinniku. I'm your host, TG Moxley, joined as always by my co-host, the man who's not just quick, he's sudden, the Punch King. How's it going this week, Punch?
It's going pretty well. It's been a pretty sudden week, a lot going on, but I did find time to watch this episode, and I'm glad that I did. It was a lot of fun, and I think we've got a lot to get to.
And before we get to it, we have our mailbag, 2 letters for us this week. First letter comes from Anonymous, says, "We want the Punch King to talk more and Moxley to talk less."
This person has terrible taste. What are they thinking?
Yeah, I don't know about that. And then our second letter is from Will Coldback in Timmins, Ontario, and he asks, "How are you having a mailbag segment when you haven't given anyone your email link yet?" Well, that's a good question, Will, and if anyone wants to mail the Super Musclecast, you can do so at mail@musclebusting.com. That's mail@musclebusting.com, not mail@musclecast.com, because we don't own that domain, and please don't buy it before we have a chance to get it. Thank you very much. All right, I'd like to, before we get into the episode as well, just add one thing that we were talking about off-air that relates to something that we had been speaking about last week, which is the status of Kinnikuman in France, and I have recently looked into that and found out that indeed Kinnikuman was translated most of the original run, I believe, into French, and had a good number of episodes air on French TV until it was eventually canceled due to controversy over a good guy wrestling character who wears a swastika and Nazi attire as part of his ring outfit, which, for obvious reasons, was not taken well to in France, nor should it be taken well to anywhere. And really, we're going to address this a little bit more when the character actually comes up, but it's just worth noting that we've got that giant puddle of poop to step in. So, Kinnikuman status, cancelled in France, France-old.
It's not really hard to understand why. I think that part of exploring and getting down into the depths of all of Kinnikuman's lore is that we have to really acknowledge the problematic parts of it, and there are quite a few. But there's also a lot of good stuff there, and so we press on, but understandably, it was cancelled in France.
Now, this episode starts with a little guy who debuted in the very first episode of Kinnikuman, and we didn't call him out at the time, and that is one Adarans Nakano, a figure who is the usual go-to in the Kinnikuman anime when we need someone to present things on TV. He is less prominent in the manga. He's more of a brief gag character rather than a recurring comic relief feature. He's a guy with many faces and interests in the anime, and we see one of them here as the host of the spooky, mysterious Tales of Terror show, The Unbalanced Zone, which appears to be one of these real-life horror, it happened to me, dramatic reenactment and first-person testimony of encounters with the supernatural kind of deal.
Indeed, and this too is, at least speaking from a North American perspective, I assume that this sort of thing was also probably featured in Japan more. Another kind of artifact of the 1980s that we're talking about, with the shows such as Unsolved Mysteries and that, where you would have a lot more of this kind of thing before probably upwards of 95% of the population walked around with a high-resolution camera in their pockets at all times. it was maybe a little bit more plausible that people had these encounters with the unknown, and you would have shows like this on this sort of topic. It definitely struck me as a kind of interesting cultural artifact of its time that this was included, and it sort of gives us our plot also, although it strikes me as a little bit funny that I might be getting ahead of us, but there wasn't really any threat perceived to be posed by this monster, although they were certainly frightened of it, the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie. This is, well, as we'll find out, just a situation where Kinnikuman's going over there to cause trouble for his own reputation and self-aggrandizement. So I thought that was interesting for the second episode of the series.
Yep, and we'll get into that in a second. Yeah, and so our Unbalanced Zone episode this week is Yosaku-san, Mr. Go Anywhere, Do Anything. He's gone to a lake and seen himself a Nessie. He swears he's seen it with these eyes of his. He swears he's seen it with these two eyes of his, even. The repetition of the I swear with these eyes of mine I saw Nessie, I swear with these two eyes of mine I saw Nessie, leads me to believe that that might have been a catchphrase or a formulaic way of saying things that was common on whatever specific show or media property might be parodied or referenced here in this little segment. But yes, Yosaku-san has seen Nessie, which he states to be 20 and then 30 meters tall, and Kinnikuman, watching at home, is quite impressed hearing about Nessie until he asks Meat, what is a Nessie? And when Meat berates him and says, you watched this entire TV program not knowing what it was talking about, Kinnikuman's reaction, just laughing and saying, well, I'm not proud of it, but yeah, exactly. I like that. That's a very Kinnikuman moment.
Yeah. I'll say things that I liked, too, that they established starting in this segment. They had a recurring visual gag. In addition to the recurring I've seen it with these own two eyes of mine, they had this visual gag where one of the characters will grow to a much larger size and be pursuing the other one with, like, on all fours on their hands and feet, but, you know, sort of galloping along like a quadruped. I thought that was kind of a funny recurring thing to have happen.
Chasing someone the way you might be chased by a 20-foot monster. Yeah, that's good stuff. So Kinnikuman, you know, he gets a lesson from Meat on what a Loch Ness Monster is, and when he finds out that they are docile, he realizes that it's the perfect opponent for him to shore up his lousy win-loss record, and so he begins hatching a plan to have himself a televised fight with the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie, which he hopes will then make him a star in the eyes of the world. I guess assuming that the rest of the people don't realize that the Loch Ness Monster is supposedly docile. They don't have the inside. They're not smart to the Nessie's business the way that Meat is. But yeah, and one of the interesting things that the manga includes that the anime doesn't is part of Kinnikuman's reasoning for why he thinks that he can beat the Loch Ness Monster in a fight is that it's specifically stated in the Unbalanced Zone as being 20 meters tall, whereas Kinnikuman's own giant form is 40 meters tall. So that's confirmation of how large Kinnikuman gets in his giant size, which I don't think happens anywhere else in the cartoon or the comic. So interesting factoid there. But yes, so he pitches his plan to Meat, and then the two of them go to the TV station. Any more thoughts on this first scene?
I just thought that it was, for a superheroic type show, it was an interesting premise to me. It stuck with me very strongly that this isn't something he's doing to save any kind of innocent people or cause or prevent the cause of destruction of property or anything of that sort. He's just seeking Nessie out to cause trouble in the hopes of getting attention on himself. It also struck me that this was not an episode that was particularly focused on wrestling, where the next episode more will be for sure. This is more or less something that could have happened in almost any Saturday morning cartoon. With regards to at least the premise and the settings, the wrestling elements of this are kind of incidental.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the most wrestling content you get in this half of the episode is the station manager beating up one of his underlings using wrestling holds when he is pitched the idea of Kinnikuman on television, because who's going to sponsor such a ridiculous thing? Although he is won over by the script, which is surprise Nessie, pin it down by the neck, pick it up and punch the crap out of it. As he says, it's a well-written script. But yeah, Kinnikuman is at the part of his career where even if he has the occasional flash of heroism like he does at the end of the last episode when he helps the little boy rescue his dad from Sikh Sejin, he's still mostly a lazy coward who's out for himself and doesn't want to work too hard, so the opportunity to beat up a big docile monster is pretty much perfect for him.
The Yamato spirit sort of comes and goes, I guess.
So at the TV station, the girls all want to meet with Kin-chan. That's Hajimoto Kinji, a Japanese comedian. But Kinnikuman gets confused and thinks that they are calling for him, so he grabs one of the girls and gives her an autograph in the form of the Niku kanji, which means meat. It's the symbol that he has on his own forehead, and so he draws it on her head, and you know, it's not a nice thing to do to someone unconsensually, but I wouldn't mind walking around with the word meat drawn on my forehead in Sharpie, so all kind of depends on where you come from.
Well, what stuck out to me in this is the suit that he was wearing. And we talk about references that we don't get the reference, but we're getting that there's a reference that we're not getting. The closest thing, at least from a United States perspective, I don't know how much this has trickled up into Canada and surely not the rest of the world, but a suit like that made me think of Matt Lesko, the get stuff for free from the government guy.
Holy moly.
So it wasn't exactly the same. His suit didn't have question marks on it, but it was very much the same kind of idea and the same kind of energy, and I am kind of curious because he wears that suit again later in the same episode. What's the deal with Kinnikuman's suit? Do you have any insight into this?
Well, I can tell you that of Kinnikuman's 2 recurring suits, this is his less popular suit. He's got a cream-colored one with more swirly red designs compared to this one's dark blue and red circle designs. He wears this one a little bit less often, but they're just the loudest, most garish, ugly suits possible, and aside from the fact that they fit his generally oafish and unappealing demeanor, I'm not sure if they have greater significance beyond that. It'd be definitely something interesting to learn about, and it would be impossible to get those suits, but I covet them. I covet them righteously. Yes, and so Kinnikuman, he pitches his monster fight to the television station, and he's got himself set up a jobber monster as a proof of concept fight, which he almost loses the fight to stepping on a car after he turns into his giant form and falling headfirst into a subway tunnel, and then eating a subway car to the face, and then getting burnt by the Godzilla-ish monster's fire and falling down and getting peed on by one of those peeing child statues. But he eventually gets his shit together and Suachi blasts the monster into pieces with his Kinniku flash, which is then revealed, but not to the TV station manager, that it was meat operating some kind of contrivance of wood and fabric and levers and pulleys and so forth all along, and not an actual kaiju.
Yeah, I think one thing that struck out to me about this, the whole sequence of events that you described, I had the thought that, and we talked last time, that there wasn't really for a long time a American localization of this. Things like the peeing statue and other elements that we'll get to later in the show give me the impression that that might not have made it onto USA children's TV in the 1980s without some editing or cuts. So there's definitely a little bit of saucy, crude humor here. I'm not really a toilet humor person, and it's not my thing, but I'm taking note of it as an interesting artifact of this show.
I will say that one of my beefs with Kinnikuman Muscle Fight is that his, Hadouken projectile attack is a fart rather than the Kinniku beam or the Kinniku flash. I feel like, fine, maybe the weak version of the quarter circle forward attack could have been a fart, and then medium and strong could have been Kinniku flash and Kinniku beam. I'm not sure we needed 3 levels of escalating farts. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. It is a show for the kids who like toilet humor, but in a way that is tuned towards 1980s Japanese sensibilities and would have gotten probably chopped to hell. Probably the violence more so than the crudeness, although a lot of the times those two go together if it had come to American television. Back at the lake, Kinnikuman has shown up for his fight with Nessie, and so has Yosaku, who tries to take over the proceedings by telling his story again. Adaran's Nakano tries to give him the bum's rush. Yosaku follows with a bum's rush of his own, jumping in front of the camera and doing a kind of fan dance where he's naked and he's covering and uncovering his genitals with one hand and then the other and dancing back and forth with fans. And this actually becomes his gimmick for the rest of the series. He shows up naked and dances with fans for his own... Yeah. And he just does it for his own edification. No one asks him to do it. But, he'll go anywhere, he'll do anything, but it's mostly naked and involving covering himself up.
Dear, oh dear.
But, yeah, Nessie shows up and is very, very big. In fact, larger than 20 meters, larger than Kinnikuman's 40-meter maximum size, and so Kinnikuman gets dribbled like a basketball and thrown into outer space.
Does he assume giant form in this? That was one thing that struck me as odd. I may have missed something, now that you say that, but my recollection is that Nessie battled ordinary-sized Kinnikuman.
I'm pretty sure that when Kinnikuman is fantasizing about all of the women that will be attracted to him for beating up this harmless lake creature, he's already in giant form. I think there's also the problem that Nessie's scale is never really consistent. I think that Nessie is 20 meters big compared to a person who is 2 meters tall, but then Nessie is 200 meters big compared to a person who's 20 meters tall. So it kind of ends up giving the impression that Kinnikuman is regular sized and that Nessie has a consistent size, when actually Nessie seems to fluctuate in size and makes Kinnikuman's own size difficult to estimate as a result. Aside from all of that, when Kinnikuman is bounced like a ball and tossed out into space, meat shows up with garlic. So Kinnikuman eats the garlic, which gives him powers like Popeye's spinach, which is a gimmick that we also saw in the last episode and is something that runs throughout the early part of the Kinnikuman series and ends up kind of on the cutting room floor with a lot of the other early ideas that don't continue. Garlic power of all of the various sources of Kinnikuman's energy ends up being the least important, but right now it's what's powering his fight against the kaiju. So Kinnikuman eats his garlic, comes flying to Earth, and promptly gets swallowed by Nessie, and everyone is very sad, and they have themselves a funeral procession for him.
That did it struck me as a very funny spot that they were all ready to go with this, and it just all happened very much on the spot. I mean, that's the nature of cartoons, but it got a pop out of me.
But speaking of popping out, here comes Kinnikuman, and he declares that he is in fact not dead. And everyone is much relieved. Meat gives him a big old hug, and then recoils because Kinnikuman stinks. And they spend some time trying to figure out exactly where Kinnikuman made his exit from Nessie. And they have a good laugh about that, or at least Kinnikuman does.
Well, the implication is that he crawled out of Nessie's ass. And that's another one of those things, I think, that may have ended up on the cutting room floor, and I can see a little bit why there was maybe some difficulty in considering localizing this to the United States, if it ever in fact was considered, because with the different elements in this episode that I would speculate would end up on the cutting room floor, I don't know that there is enough that wasn't cut that's left standing at this point.
Indeed, and it's interesting because in the manga, you actually don't get Nessie eating and excreting Kinnikuman. Nessie simply shows up, and the entirety of the fight consists of Nessie demonstrating much greater size than Kinnikuman, giving Kinnikuman a couple of friendly licks, and then wading back into the water and swimming away. So the entire fight with Nessie is an invention of the cartoon and replaces a segment in the manga where Kinnikuman beats up Hajimoto Kinji, who's outraged at him for signing the Niku kanji on one of his fans. And I think, getting beat up and eaten and pooped out by a giant sea monster rather than beating up a comedian after harassing his fans is a better character arc for Kinnikuman.
I think so too, although, as I said, this is a very weird second episode in that he does this all for the sake of his own promotion and reputation. But in the end, because he's very ineffective in the fight, but really is able to escape unscathed as well, this is one of those episodes where a bunch of things happen and it doesn't really matter. It's all funny, but it does strike me as a very peculiar second episode.
Let me see where it is in the... Because in the manga... so it's actually the 5th episode of the manga. The second half of the episode, 2B, Save Planet Kinniku, is where we really pick up with the main Kinnikuman story arc again and get away from the Monster of the Week format.
Let me cut you off a little bit to first ask a question of just personal interest here. What was the publication schedule of the manga? Weekly? Monthly?
Yeah, so Kinnikuman ran from 1979 to 1987 in Weekly Shonen Jump and produced 387 chapters during that roughly 8-year span. So that's quite a lot of work, and quite a lot of evolution can happen to the story in a relatively short amount of chronological time. We see that the ideas behind Kinnikuman grow pretty rapidly in its early years. And so now, moving on to the second part of the episode, Save Planet Kinniku. So we begin this one with just a stupid gag. We've got a woman searching for a public toilet, and she happens to find the one that is adjoining Kinnikuman's little Kinniku house. We didn't call it out specifically last episode, but one of my favorite things about Kinnikuman's home, in addition to the fact that its outer wall is styled after his own face, is that it is a little lean-to wooden shack built onto the outside of a public bathroom in a park.
Yeah, that I didn't catch that it was on the side of a public bathroom in the preceding episodes, so this does inform me of that. I wasn't sure the purpose of the gag, really, but I suppose it does inform you of the exactly where his house is and the nature of it.
And, the kind of squalor that he's living in as a prince in exile, because Meat begins this episode by filling him in further on his backstory, which is that the pig that was taken home in Kinnikuman's place after Kinnikuman was abandoned during his parents' vacation grew up and went on to win the Kinniku Combat Olympics, which is an Olympics that consists of judo, boxing, and wrestling, which really are my three preferred. You add weightlifting to that, and I really don't know what other sports you need. Maybe like badminton or something? I don't know. But the pig wins the Kinnikuman Combat Olympics, which is a event that does not come up again in the show, so we can go ahead and forget about it. And then goes on to challenge Kinnikuman's father, Mayumi Kinniku, for the All-Universe Championship belt, which is a title that superficially resembles the NWA 10 pounds of gold, I thought.
Yeah, and it would not be the only reference in that direction. In trying to psych him up, his wife will reference Luthez, which I found funny, given that this is coming from a different planet. And in part of this, I don't think we ever saw her deliver the suplex, but she's posing with him in a German suplex position that I've seen is part of what appears to be sort of an iconic Japanese scene. I've seen this in other animes where a character will German suplex another, and from what I've been able to read about it, it goes back to, I believe that it would have been Luthez or Karl Gotch performing a German suplex on Riki Dozen that may have been an iconic moment in Japanese wrestling, although I'd be interested to learn more about that. I'm not completely solid on that little bit of trivia.
Yeah, that's something that we're gonna look up and have something to say on the @musclebusting Twitter account when this episode drops, because that's a nice little visual gag in this episode where Kinnikuman's father is lamenting that he's too old to get back into the ring and win his title back from this pig who's now styling himself King Tun. And his wife, as you say, berates him and says that wrestling's Iron Man, Luthez, made his comeback at the age of 50 to win the NWA Championship, which I think is actually not a correct bit of trivia. I think that he was only 48 or 49 at the time of his last title win, but close enough. And then she gives Mayumi the German suplex that you referenced and that hopefully we can dig up a little bit more on. But yeah, King Tun is in charge of the planet, and the entire planet Kinniku is taken over by a swarm of 35 to 50 delinquent hogs. They're styling themselves like wayward youths with their leather jackets and their motorcycles and their disrespect for authority, and generally creating a hell of a time on planet Kinniku.
And that gag really struck with me. It's always these little things in Kinnikuman that pop out and make the series such a joy to me. Because the implication is that I'm explaining the joke here and killing it, but the implication is that there was this gaggle of pigs that were just waiting for their moment. And when King Tun gets in control, they can take over and do this. These ridiculous, absurd world-building details are kind of what gets over with me about this series.
Nothing like a nice, ridiculous world-building detail. And I'd just like to now say thanks to our sponsor, Dairy Queen. I was reached out to by Matt at the local Dairy Queen, whose basement had flooded, and he told me he would give me a case of dilly bars if I helped him clear it out. So thank you very much, Dairy Queen, for sponsoring episode 2 of the Super Musclecast. So Kinnikuman is at first not too moved by Meat's pleas to return home, thinking, well, my family abandoned me all these years ago. Why should I care about them and come save them? Meat pitches him the idea of all the gyudon you can eat, and Kinnikuman decides he's coming home. And so they board their spaceship and head back to planet Kinniku, where a hero's welcome is waiting to greet Meat. When people hear that Meat has the prince with him, they are initially quite ready to fawn over the prince, and then they discover that the prince is Kinnikuman, and they all have a good laugh at his expense, which, you know, seemed unnecessary. He's a butterface, but he's got an okay physique, you know? And I feel like in wrestling that can go a long way.
Where his parents are concerned, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. He's got the, what were they called? Cadro lips? That are distinctive to his face. But otherwise, he resembles his mother and father quite a bit.
Although not his sister.
Which was
his
weird.
His sister appears to be a regular human person and doesn't make many more appearances in the series. She kind of gets sent upstairs like an unwanted Family Matters child and just disappears shortly after this.
Well, we could speculate on that a little bit, but let's not.
Let's not. And so Kinnikuman learns for the first time in his life that his given name is Suguru, which he says is a stupid name as his ears turn very big and begin to flap. This is a reference to the pitcher for the Yomiuri Giants, Suguru Egawa, who had big flappy ears. One of the many baseball references that we will see throughout the lifespan of Kinnikuman.
And in this episode.
Because he initially refuses his parents' pleas to go and fight King Tun, saying that he's actually only come for a visit. And then when his sister entreats him, he becomes chivalrous. Don't really know why. His sister's a mysterious character, and he becomes chivalrous and decides that he will in fact fight King Tun and promises to hit a home run.
I was picking up on a little bit of a maybe lecherous or at least love-struck vibe to this, which is gross. I could be reading too much into it, and I'd be happy to just breeze past this and even cut this segment out, but it raised my eyebrows a bit.
Yeah. Kinnikuman being consistently a failed ladies' man and a lech is a running gag that misses more often than it hits, and it misses by a wide margin when it's his own sister. But luckily that temptation is quickly removed, so we don't have to worry about it anymore.
Quite right. But he'll have
Quite
a match, a 3-part match, in fact, with King Tun.
A 3-part match. A match following the proceedings of the Kinniku Combat Olympics. Judo, which he's confident in. Boxing, which he's even more confident in. And wrestling, which is his true specialty. And promptly goes on to lose at all 3, potentially because he forgot his supply of garlic on Earth, and he explains that this reduces him down to 1/10 of his normal power, which is actually a number that we will eventually be able to quantify. Kinnikuman might be one of the first, if not the first, anime and manga to get really deep into the weeds with numerically quantifying how strong everyone is. So pretty soon we're going to have a number that we can apply that 1/10 fraction to. But he's out of garlic, he loses all 3 phases of the match, but luckily for us, the tonkatsu chef who initially owned the pig that escaped from the shop, that made it onto the ship, that was mistaken for the baby, that was raised on the planet, that won the Combat Olympics, that won the All-Universe Championship belt, that unleashed the horde of feral juvenile hogs, onto planet Kinniku escaped from.
Yeah, and it was such a random, out of nowhere resolution to the episode, but I thought it was perfect. It's another one of these early episodes where you can say that the protagonist doesn't really accomplish much and it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. I liked the second half, though, quite a bit, and I thought that was a fun little touch. I I enjoyed it. I don't know what else to say. And it was it was pretty funny, and the poor king resuming his crown. I can't imagine that is going to do much for his perception, but I guess in a vacuum, the power has to go somewhere.
Yep. Mayumi picks up the dropped belt like it was the WWF Hardcore Championship, and he was Crash Holly, and he's just off to the races as king and champion once again.
Can we also mention a gag that I don't think that I saw earlier, or I saw it rather, but we didn't speak on it earlier? I love that Kinnikuman's little Gyudon jingle was apparently the national anthem of the planet Kinniku. Am I tracking that right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it was. And instead of Kinnikuman singing it and getting bonked on the head by an angry cow that comes out of his bowl of beef and rice, it's sung by a robustly sized opera singer with a high falsetto type voice. And, it's fast, cheap, and delicious. I was going to give the people at home an update on my homemade gyudon, but the grocery store messed up my order, and I didn't get the ribeye that I ordered, and so I felt like a bowl of beef and rice that was just rice probably wasn't in the spirit of what Kinnikuman enjoys, and so that's going to have to go for a future episode. But once I start making this stuff at home, I will let you know if it is indeed fast, cheap, and delicious, and all I'll need for 300 years.
With regards to the show, we'd been on a tangent about the national anthem of Planet Kinniku also being Kinnikuman's signature beef gyudon jingle, but the status quo is restored, the king's back in power, maybe not in an altogether dignified and advantageous sort of way, but the reign of King Tun is over for the moment. However, Kinnikuman is going to be replaced as prince and will have no recourse but to travel back to Earth.
Yes, indeed. The family decides that Kinnikuman is not a sufficient son to take care of the family legacy, and so from the Yomiuri Giants, they adopt Hara Tatsunori.
Another baseball reference.
Another baseball man. It really, it's amazing to me that baseball and baseball manga have such a strong presence in Kinnikuman, but it's one of those things where it gives me an opportunity to learn about things that I didn't know about beforehand, so I am enjoying filling in my knowledge of Japanese baseball besides Mr. Baseball and the gloriously named Nippon Ham Fighters.
And I enjoyed this episode a lot in general. The Nessie first half of it was a little bit weaker, but I think that they more than made up for it with the King Tun arc, and I like, just more broadly, when considered in context with the second episode, that we've had kind of a smorgasbord. If we look back, we had his introduction arc, we've had the emergence of Terryman, the Nessie story, which is a non sequitur for the moment, and now returning to explore some of his roots on planet Kinniku and with his parents. I think we're on a good track, and there's been a little something for everybody, a little bit of everything, and we're going well, and it's the second episode.
I think things are going pretty well on the second episode of the Super Musclecast, and I will take this opportunity to urge everybody to visit musclebusting.com, where we have debuted the wrestler name generator. Consider possible future championship contenders for the All-Universe Championship belt, such as Trey Valiant, Mason Cage, Strad Dangerous, Jim Bob Rivera, and Gunnar Del Armeggio. Well, what a good cast of characters, and you can generate yourself some wrestlers if you head on to musclebusting.com and click the wrestler name generator.
Wouldn't want to mess with them.
That's Lunchbox Gold.
So we'll be looking forward to the next episode of the Musclecast. We'll also be looking forward to more content on the Super Mario Brothers Super Blog. Fantastic stuff there already. And more to come.
And now, I forget what it is we say at the end of the episode. I'm pretty sure that I say something, and then you say rock on.
Well, rock on, T.G. Moxley. This has been the Punch King, and as always, it's been a pleasure to talk Kinnikuman with you. More soon.
Rock on.
はちゃめちゃ忙しいスーパーヒーロー